Good afternoon, everybody. Great to see so many faces in the room. We're going to get started. I appreciate that there's still people that might be joining and trickling in, but I think for time's sake, we'll start this session. And I just want to introduce myself. My name is Grant Martin. I am the coordinator for the Canadian Shelter Transformation Network. I'll be the moderator and also one of the co-presenters. Joining me today is Kevin Webb from the Calgary Drop-In Center. We have Michele Markowski, and we have Colleen Allain from YWCA in Hamilton. And we're talking about all things shelter transformation today, and they'll be talking a bit about their journey on that path. So up first, we said that we would skip bios because you can read them on the website or in the app. And also our presenters, it makes them feel uncomfortable to hear their bios read out loud. So without any bio, joining us first to speak is our good friend Kevin Webb. And as he's coming up, I just want to start by recognizing that this conference is being held on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin peoples. The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory since time immemorial. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. And so with that, I'll pass it over to our friend, Kevin.
Thank you, Grant. I'm really happy to present alongside both of you as well. Welcome, everybody. I'm Kevin Webb. I'm the director of the Emergency Shelter and Housing at the Calgary Drop-In Center. Before we actually talk about our transformation to becoming a housing-focused shelter, I wanted to give you guys a perspective of the Calgary Drop-In Center as a whole. So our mission is to work with community to end homelessness one person at a time. I am notorious for walking around, and I will try not to do that through this presentation. And that our vision is a community where everyone can find a home. I'm going to ask everyone a question here. Who lives in a city or a community that your point in time count was less than 500 people? Who here had a point in time count less than 1,000? So to put the Calgary Drop-In Center into perspective for you, we could take everyone that's in your communities and put them in our building. We are an incredibly large shelter. We have occupancy for just over 1,000 people a night in one building. We're about 1,000 square feet. We are low barrier. We are trauma-informed, housing-focused, a recovery-oriented system of care. We do focus on adults that are 18 plus. We serve 3 meals a day and have our basic hygienes. That's our main shelter area. One of the things that we were having a conversation about last night was, do we need to continue to call our program an emergency shelter? So if anyone in this room is like, throughout this presentation wants to ruminate on that and come up with any ideas, please let me know, because we had a bunch throwing around last night that just weren't sticking. But yeah, so we are an incredibly large emergency shelter in the downtown of east side of Calgary. We are more than an emergency shelter. So we have, obviously as a housing focused shelter, we have a wide range of housing supports as well as health supports. Prior to COVID, we had 4 nurses that we self-funded for that did an amazing amount of work. Through COVID, we started to really realize the importance of health and housing, and have since expanded our health services by dramatic amounts to include programs that respond to individuals that have had adverse reactions to drug poisoning. We have a nurse-led clinic, medication distribution, as well as doctor clinics. And then we also have a medical detox and pre-treatment program. So a huge wide range of services within our shelter. The one thing that is super important about this is that every single service in our organization is housing first and housing focused. An individual can be in our nurse clinic and they are talking about housing. An individual can be in our laundry facilities and we're having conversations about housing, or our donation center and we're having conversations about housing. But since this is all about our transformation, I want to give you a little history of how we got here. So to start with, the question always comes up is, what is a housing-focused shelter? First of all, I'd like to point everyone to our Canadian Shelter Transformation Network, and there are some pamphlets up here, but Grant's going to talk more about that, so I won't go right into it. What we want to do is take shelters and move it to a process for individuals to go from the second they enter the shelter services, how quickly can we end their time in homelessness through housing or other outcome means? It is a relentless pursuit. Everyone in that organization is a housing-focused worker, and we are working towards ending persons' homelessness as quick as possible with the most safe, appropriate housing. Some of the things right off the bat that we were told was that this is a full change of operations. This was not we're going to be housing focused by having a one program that does housing. It is across the whole organization, and it was a culture change. It was a shift in all of our processes and policies, but where it all started was in mid-2017. Our now leader, Sandra Clarkson, was at a conference and heard, as he puts himself, the leader of the teams of misfits, but Ian DeJong from OrgCode, talking about this idea of how shelters can become an engine to end homelessness. And that light bulb went off, and Sandra came back and really wanted to see how we can move away from shelters where people sit there and stay and become chronic, and what can we do to reduce that number by housing people. She put together a little team of individuals to start this work. We called ourselves the Pirates because we were breaking ground and doing crazy things. And we just kind of started to look at it. And one of the very first things that we looked at was through the Shelter Transformation Network, there is an assessment that individuals can do for your shelter to see where you're at in the housing journey. And we took the time to look at that and realized, like, holy cow, we have a lot of work to do. Because of the size of our shelter, and at the time of kind of being one of the beginning people of doing this work, we recruited a consulting company to come in and do a review of our shelter operations. We thought at the time we were doing pretty good and everything was going to be fine, until he came back with 83 recommendations that we had to change. One of the things that I'm going to talk about is our lessons learned through that process. And I'll just throw this one out there right now, but that little group of pirates, change management wasn't the best of our abilities at the very beginning of all this. And we went a little fast on some things, but the transformation has been ongoing since 2018. In 2017, 2018, we made the declaration. Sandra made the declaration that we are going to be housing focused. And as an organization, we were going to look at every single step of our operation and make the changes required to fall in line with this philosophy. In 2019, we really started to move through that process, and we started doing things like housing campaigns, right? We wanted to get that ball rolling within the shelter, that this is the path that we were going on, and that, it's easy for our staff, and we can have conversations with our staff, but to start to get the individuals that were in the building to understand that this was the path, we did a housing campaign. We were going to house 100 people in 100 days. And it really, what that created at the very beginning was that snowball effect within our organization, where the individuals now start to come into our facility because they know we're going to be there to end their homelessness. 2020, 2022, 2023, we all know what happened. One of the things through this time was that we weren't going to let COVID stop our housing work. The we looked at, a lot of different shelters across Canada got hotels. We wanted to take that same model of our housing-focused shelter, and instead of making the hotels an extension of shelter, create a short-term transitional housing program. And we also started our second housing campaign where we were going to do 250 people in 3 months. And we were fortunate enough that we were able to do that. Through this time, we were also developing a new database for our organization. So we wanted to start to use data to drive the work that we were doing. So this was the very first stage of starting to use data within our organization. Twofold. One, to look at programming, but also to start to understand the people that we're actually serving. With 1,000 people a night, we needed to start to understand who the people were and what level and supports they need for what level and different streams of housing that they could fit into. So really started to dig into the data. We also started to incorporate our housing-focused shelter model into our affordable housing buildings, which was a very unique thing to do. We own and operate 3 mixed market residential buildings, and as I said, this is an organizational change, not an individual program change. So we started to look at our affordable housing suites and incorporated housing first principles into those, where we take individuals from shelter, move them into affordable housing, and then work with them to become market or near market rent. So we start to create flow in our shelter, and we're starting to create flow within our affordable housing building. So again, that's that principle behind this, that it is across the entire organization, not a single program. In 2023 is when we started to expand our health services and really focusing on housing-focused health services. Following the principles of housing first, our health services team works with individuals. We'll have the conversations about housing. We will connect them with our housing workers. But our health services team in that housing-focused medical care is actually connecting individuals to the resources in community and not bringing them back into shelter. So that's that piece of housing first, where we have that client-centered care, the recovery-oriented care, but also that community integration throughout it, right? So again, all of our programs. That brings us to 2024. And this is a very short snippet. I'm watching my time very closely because this is a topic that I could be up here for the next 6 hours talking about. But in 2024 we've done multiple reviews of our organization. We've developed into our programs program reviews, again, data-driven, client-driven, guest-driven. We're also looking at more quality improvement initiatives within the organization. And then we've also adapted into our programming a lot more feedback from guests of the organization. We've always done this on a point in time, where we do a survey at a point in time. We've tried over the years to do a point in time in the summer and then one in the winter, because we know our demographics change. This year we've gone with, we partner with an organization to have kiosks in our shelter, where we're getting live feedback at all times. That's driving our service delivery now. So we're looking at things like, we know breakfast is people aren't getting enough breakfast, so we're starting to make that change. We're looking at safety and security. So really we're in that phase right now of the quality improvement. And then in the aspects of change management, we're kind of in that reigniting stage with all the staff and getting going on the shelter transformation work. And then we are also working incredibly closely with the Canadian Shelter Transformation Network on supporting other organizations through their change. One of the other things that came out in the last year, started in 2023, but is our triage and assessment tool. So one of the pieces that we realized as a large shelter, and as we've easily demonstrated here, that a lot of the people in this room could take their entire PIC count and put it in our building, we had to start to look at ourselves as a system of care within the larger system of care, being incredibly good partners with our partners in Calgary, But we wanted to start to look at individuals in the building and what is the best housing stream that they can align with. So we spent a lot of time over the last couple of years really developing our housing assessment tool, which is starting to drive our outcomes and our success rates a little higher too. So I know that is a lot about, in a short period of time, about the work that we do and what a housing focused shelter is, but I think everyone wants to know, does it work? It does. So since 2017, we have had 2,760 housing outcomes. That is housing alone. That is not every other outcome that goes along with it. That is not unique individuals. We understand and we know through this process that people will be housed 4 or 5 times, sometimes twice. Our total outcomes, which I'm going to break down a little bit later, is actually 3,759 individuals that we've supported to end their time in homelessness. So outcomes for 3,000 people. All of that being said, this is probably the number one number that if you take anything away from today, 60% of the people we have housed since 2017 are housed independently, without rental supports and without case management, and are thriving in community. I'm hesitant on this number, on talking about return to shelter numbers, specifically when we don't have a shared database across Canada or even provincially. But individuals of this 2,760 people, we are sitting at a 4.8% return to shelter rate. Our independent housing, that 60% is actually our lowest percentage. It does make a massive difference, not only to the individuals that we're serving, but to the entire system of care. That 60% of individuals that we've housed independently probably would have come into a shelter, done an assessment, and sat and waited on a triage list for housing. So our goal, and being good community partners and working with our CBO, Calgary Homeless Foundation, is to start to reduce that wait list by doing this work through the shelters. So this is where we break it down, but so 1,756 people were housed independently. 780 at coordinated access and assessment, 140 in our own buildings. 140 in our own buildings, and with that 3-tiered case management and that goal of working towards market rent, we're probably around I think we've had 2 or 3 evictions in the last 3 years, and then 177 through supportive. One of the things that we've realized is housing is not the only outcome. So we count this. This isn't a successful outcome in our grand total, but we've diverted 158 people to the appropriate shelter. So someone coming to a low barrier 18+ shelter with 1,000 people that is fleeing domestic violence doesn't need to be in our shelter. A piece of this work is understanding what we do, who we serve, and supporting and working with individuals and other people that are experts in that. Perfect example with youth. I don't know if anyone's here from Trellis in Calgary, but we have an amazing relationship with them where if we have a youth that shows up at the DI, we pick up the bat foam and the youth diversion worker comes right over and does that work because that's not our expertise. 132 individuals were reconnected with natural supports. This one is kind of a mix because it's mostly natural supports, but this was one that I don't think we really realized the importance of it, specifically in Alberta, where we have a lot of individuals that show up in Alberta for work and that may not work out and they get stuck in a system. But we have helped 311 people relocate. Our relocation and under this housing focus model is that we want to ensure that there is a home where the people are going and there is a support system in place. So we're checking that out. We've sent people to India, Bulgaria, Dubai, Ireland. The Ireland one I love because he actually called and wanted to send us the money back. And then 167 people that self-resolved. So again, this is where we were looking at definitions around outcomes, and I think some of the work that is happening through the Shelter Transformation Network. Self-resolve to us doesn't mean the person just disappeared. Self-resolve to us is we've had a phone call with the person and we physically know that they have obtained housing. This one blows my mind every day, but we started this work really December 2017. The Calgary Drop-In Center had 349 individuals that were chronic. We are down to, when I put this presentation together and submitted it just last week, we were at 138. I got a phone call last night through some HAT assessment work that we're doing. 4 of those people were housed last week. So we're actually down to 134. This is not the work. This is hard work. And this is work that we support people through. These real outcomes are because of the people that we're there to help. We walk alongside them, but it's their bravery and their ability to try again that is actually making these outcomes happen. So we cannot take credit for it all. Lessons learned as we have gone through this, and if anyone is starting it, listen to these, reach out anytime, we can talk more about them. I talked first of all about our pirate team and, doing things a little too quick maybe at the beginning, because we were excited, right? We knew that this was going to make an incredible difference in our city. We knew that we could lead and support others as we got along through it. So we were excited, but we needed to take a step back and slow down on some of it. That full commitment is required. We've worked with other shelters, and it's a key point to doing this work is being on board from the board level or the executive director level down, that this is the change you're going to make. This is going to be hard to hear. You will lose staff along the way. This is a major change to the way that operations are done. And we understood that, and we celebrated people as they left. Right? It is not a bad thing. It's just that people did not want to align. And honestly, some of the people that we thought were never going to align are some of our largest supporters and are out there housing people like crazy right now. But it is a reality of the work that this type of culture change, you will see some people leave. Make the change known. Don't only make the change known to your staff. Take the time to engage with the individuals that are in your shelter. Explain the changes that are happening. I can say that this is probably the one thing we missed at the beginning. Take the time, hold town halls, put posters up, have people having the conversations about why we're doing it. Get the individuals that are in the system to understand that we're doing this to support them. Don't let funding be an excuse. We started down this path without any additional funding. Again, difficult decisions had to be made, but we sat and took a hard look at the entire operations of the organization, and we're like, you know what? This auxiliary shelter that we have over here, we actually have space to move it over here, and we can take that staffing body and convert them into housing workers. Or do we have to make an adjustment here in our organization to increase one diversion worker, right? So again, it's the commitment of the organization, but do not let funding be an excuse. This is a long process. We are in 2014. We are continuing to grow. Our journey is far, far, far from over, right? Especially as we continue to develop the Shelter Transformation Network and we're learning from others, right? We're trying things. If you're trying things, Sharing that information back and forth is key to continuing this work going and continuing to move forward. We say that status quo is not okay. Status quo is never okay when we're dealing with human lives. Be agile. Start a program, follow the data. If it's not working, start another one. Perfect example was just recently, we had case managers and we had housing support workers and we had diversion workers. And we started to see that with our housing crisis that the case managers' numbers were dropping, but our housing specialist numbers were increasing. So we actually just combined the two teams to be one. And we're already seeing the impact for the individuals that we serve. So be agile, understand that you're going to start a program, it may not work. Learn one thing from it, it's a success. Use data to drive your decisions. We all collect so much data. There is like 8 sessions of data every day here, right? Use data smartly. Ask the questions of why you're collecting it, what you're collecting it for, and how it is going to drive your services forward. This one always gets in a little awe when I say this one, but coordinated access and assessment is not the only answer to housing. Coordinated access and assessment should be the last access to housing. We do not do our assessment tool at the DI until we know the person truly needs the supports. We are in a position in shelters to truly get to know individuals, to learn about them, to know their stories, to start to triage where individuals can fit best within housing with their own input and with their own ideas and with that client-driven supports. We do not have to do an assessment the second someone walks in and put them on a list and tell them that that's the only way they're going to find housing. Because our data and our outcomes blow that out of the water. But we still need to be incredibly good partners with coordinated access and assessment. But by doing this work, we can start to reduce that wait list and get the appropriate people into the appropriate housing outcomes. 2 minutes? Okay. I'm not going to show you the video then, but be willing to take risks. Sandra allows me, and my previous leadership has always allowed me, to come up with crazy ideas, and as long as we're not blowing the budget, to give it a shot, right? Have conversations with guests and be like, what can we do different? Give it a shot, right? We've always done the same thing, so let's try something new. I talked about this one, but get input from people that are using the services. Find your internal champions. The internal champions will start to move that needle forward for everyone else in the organization. You'll see the culture change happen throughout the programs and throughout the organization by that champion starting to talk about it. And find your champion in your guests. Find the person that's been the longest staying in shelter and house them. Take their best friend and house them next door, right? Start to create that community instead of in shelter. And then just remember that this work changed lives. Shifting the operations of shelters to be engines of ending homelessness is going to make a change not only for the individuals that we're serving and we're housing, but for our entire system of care. So, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Grant. Thank you, Kevin. Oops. I didn't know there was a video. Now I feel bad. We'll find another way to get it out to people. All right. All right. So joining us next will be Michele and Colleen from the YWCA in Hamilton.
Just throw it down. Try not to fall off the stage in front of a giant room. All right.
Okay, full disclosure, I'm super nervous, so I'll try my best. My name's Colleen. I'm the program supervisor at the YWCA's Low Barrier Drop-In, Carol Ann's Place. So during this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about a process for service restrictions within our space that we implemented, which was created through research that I conducted at McMaster University during my BSW. I'm going to let Michele introduce herself in just a moment. Sorry, I have a completely different laptop for notes.
I also had one job, yeah.
So first we're going to talk a little bit about what Carol Ann's Place is and the services that it offers. And then next we're going to talk about our values as an organization and give a little bit of an overview on service restrictions and why they're issued and why we reviewed our policy. And how we put this theory into practice and some of the outcomes that we've seen since doing so. But before we get into that, I'm going to let Michele introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michele Markowski. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the manager of low barrier services and harm reduction at the YWCA. So I wanted to thank Kevin as well. You know, we started the work around similar times, but we're at a very different place, and I think these settings are the exact opportunity to feel reinvigorated, and it came out of a session that I attended through the Shelter Transformation Network that really kind of gave some direction in how we can reduce harm and be low barrier services. So thank you for sharing that information and reinvigorating me when I'm feeling tired. So what is Carol Ann's Place? Carol Ann's Place started in 2016. It started as an Out of the Cold program. I was actually a frontline worker that was working in the program that was upstairs. And my manager came to me and said, you want to come downstairs and start this program to have people come inside out of the winter? We've got soup, tea, and mats, but we know people have a need. So it was a hectic time, but we knew we needed to address the barriers that the women in our community were facing, the women and gender diverse people. With increased violence that they were experiencing and the weather looming, we were like, let's figure it out. So we are a space that prioritizes remaining low barrier and reducing harm. So that's as a framework as well as harm reduction supplies and supports to harm reduction workers. So many laptops. Okay. So we provide a variety of basic needs, all from a gendered framework. So acknowledging that access to things like meals and showers and laundry are basic needs that everybody has the right to, but what is the gendered lens that we can look at as far as the people that we support? So we support individuals from a variety. I always say you can't really pigeonhole people into what their pathway to homelessness would be. And then the added lens of adding a gendered perspective, we have people that engage in sex work, we have people that are seniors that have, with the housing crisis that's happening that are seeing our services. So how do we connect them to healthcare? How do we connect them to laundry? What does that mean? How does that look different for them versus what, maybe a co-ed space? What does the safety look like? What does that look like to them, right? So we aim to do this from a gendered lens and understanding that they experience high levels of violence and the trauma that's associated with that is really important to consider. My other job. So these are organizational values, intersectional feminism, people-centered belonging, responsibility, and partnerships. So in everything that we do when it comes to there is no feminism without intersectionality. Let's start there, right? So when we're looking at the folks that access our services, how do we ensure that we are being people-centered, connecting them to the resources that they've actually identified themselves? How do we ensure that they feel belonging? I think one of the things that I always say to folks is, we're trying to create this space of belonging, but when you really look at it, we're actually trying to join in the belonging that people have already created for themselves, like you had mentioned amongst the community. They support each other, they care for each other. I'm actually how do I get in on that and support you and be a part of your community as opposed to being I need to be the champion of creating community for you. The community is already there. We actually just have to find a way to build trust and be accountable and be responsible for our own actions. So that's also where we needed to reflect and look at our processes and our service restrictions and ensure that we are partnering with other services to connect people, partnering with the community that was already accessing our space and seeing what they identified as their need.
So next I'm going to talk a little bit about what are service restrictions and what are their impacts, because as we all know, service restrictions are impactful to the folks that we serve, and they have the ability to cause a lot of harm. So as I'm sure most of the people in this room know, a service restriction is when an individual is banned from accessing a shelter or a drop-in space for a period of time due to a specific behavior or an incident that occurred. So service restrictions are most often temporary and can be anywhere from a few days to a few months. But because of a lack or due to a lack of documentation, sometimes they can be permanent. So impacts of service restrictions, they are very impactful and they have the potential to be harmful by taking away folks' access to basic needs. They make it more difficult for people to access support and resources that they'd only be able to access within drop-in spaces or shelters. They isolate people from community, and they make people more vulnerable to violence, theft, drug poisoning while they are outside. So women and gender diverse people, who are the folks that CAP serves, or Carol Ann's Place serves, are much more likely to experience things like physical and sexual violence when they're sleeping outside. And women and gender diverse folks who are sleeping outside experience higher rates of poor physical and mental health and higher rates of substance use than folks that are staying inside. So there's a whole host of potential impacts that women and gender diverse people face specifically. So in traditional shelter spaces, Hamilton recently implemented Hamilton's emergency shelter standards, which kind of gives service providers a guideline to implementing service restrictions within their spaces. So in order to do so, they have to follow a process for approving, reviewing, documenting, and appealing restrictions. They have to inform the folks that are accessing their programs of the policy and appeals process. They have to work to connect folks that are service restricted to other community resources, and create a process that informs how and when clients will be informed of this policy and the process of reaccessing their spaces, how data will be collected and reviewed by homeless serving sector leadership, and expectations during cold alerts and heat warnings, which usually look like relaxing service restrictions when we're able to do so. And staff and spaces also must use a trauma-informed, anti-racist, and anti-oppressive gender equity lens, recognizing the systemic barriers faced by women, trans, gender diverse, and non-binary folks. However, in drop-ins, we don't have a set of guidelines within our spaces to govern service restrictions. So it has the potential to cause a lot of inconsistency and confusion in a lot of different spaces.
Excellent. Yeah. So when are service restrictions issued? So that was one of our biggest starting questions when we're working with our teams and we're trying to assess were you unsafe? Were you uncomfortable? So after the opening conversations with staff and finding that we spent 75% of our time getting it on Monday, I call it, it's terrible, but like getting hit with bricks, you feel, it's 2 days on a weekend, but now you have to assess what happened with my new team members that are experiencing potentially unsafety or like discomfort. How do we kind of start to comb through that? So after opening the conversation with the staff team, we took around and spent some time co-creating strategies to improve our response in the future. I want to stress throughout this whole presentation that we tried to make sure that it was written in our presentation, but I feel like we could have done it even more just to stress how much we speak with the people that are accessing space. So we, doing a lot of things off the side of our desk. It's not in the form of surveys, but it's in a form of a lot of collaboration, a lot of communication. It's often over breakfast. We say, we're thinking about changing this. What do you think, right? Like, what do you want in your coffee? What do you think about the way we're doing this process? And we collect feedback that way. So everybody knows when they see me coming, I probably have 2 questions for them. I'm like, what do you think about it? No, let's change it. So after considering that feedback, we really wanted to spend a lot of time talking about it with our team. So we had process planning meetings. I'm finding ways to like name meetings to make them sound interesting and cool, but also direct. I'm like, come join me and let's talk about this. With a key like focus on engaging conversations. So service restrictions, one thing that I was saying to the team, or many things actually, is that they shouldn't be a surprise to the individuals that we're working with. Period, right? Like, so the purpose of doing this is not to change behavior. If you are experiencing something and this is how it presents and it's something that's not within our ability to support, if it's like there's increased levels of violence due to anxiety, I want to make sure that we are clear and transparent with people. Where we can't have this, we still want to give you opportunities to communicate with us, have conversations with us, and be creative. And it's not a form of punishment that we're doing this to show you or to teach you how to integrate or anything like that. It's just that we have these guidelines. We have to be clear with what we can and can't do. How can we support you? But if this happens again, we want to make sure that we can try and reduce the likelihood of that happening. Like, let's work together. It's very collaborative. So I said that to the teams. If you see somebody, you need to have that conversation. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. So why we reviewed our service. So like I had mentioned, I think that it worked out that it aligned very closely with the shelter standards that came out, but it was out of the research that Colleen had done and had presented and brought to us a few years ago, kind of recognizing what we already knew were the gaps and trying to figure out the language that we wanted to bring into it. So as a program, it's important to always reflect on our practices. I say that we're a part of the community. We are not just because we're a program, it doesn't mean that we are the all-knowing. We are an aspect of the community that we work within. So we wanted to ensure that we were being accountable while we were trying to support folks that are experiencing homelessness, that we were still centering them in those conversations and ensuring that we were recognizing that they were experiencing high levels of violence and trauma that impacted how they access our space and how they interacted with our team and how they interacted with each other, and consider all those factors as we made decisions. So the research, I'll let Colleen carry that one away.
So next we're going to talk a little bit about the research that I completed through McMaster. So when I was originally doing this research, the objective of it was to look at, due to the lax set of standards that govern service restrictions within low barrier drop-in settings, this creates room for inconsistency and has the potential to increase harm to service users. So through this research, I analyzed these inconsistencies and aimed to develop a method to implement service restrictions that reduced harm and was trauma-informed, and encouraged accountability and critical thinking amongst the staff team, but also the folks accessing space as well. So for my research methods, I did a lot of case note analysis. So I analyzed a lot of the case notes made by staff in this low barrier drop-in setting in Hamilton, documenting service restrictions. And these case notes were from between 2022 to 2023. I focused on a lot of the language that was used by staff when they were documenting incidents, the length of the restriction, and what behaviors or what sorts of incidents led to these restrictions. And I took qualitative and quantitative data from these notes to identify patterns and inconsistencies. So another method I used was engagement with community partners. So I engaged a lot with leadership within these within this drop-in settings, and as well as frontline staff to ask them about what they think would work in their spaces and which would reduce harm to service users. I was not able to conduct actual surveys with service users in this space, but I did have a lot of conversations with folks about service restrictions. And that's a big part of my role now, engaging folks in conversation when they're coming back from restrictions, kind of getting their point of view on what they think occurred, and also talking to them about re-access within the spaces.
So our key findings, I want to be very transparent. This was not an easy process, right? As you know, if you've done any of this work, the topic of service restrictions and behavior modification techniques becomes very tense when you're talking with a team that's exhausted, that's running around, that doesn't have the opportunity to really sit down and be like, why did you do this? They're like, she threw something at me. Like it's black and white. But low barrier work cannot be black and white. We dance in the gray, we hang out there, we try and figure it out. That's really uncomfortable on top of all of the crises I could list. So trying to create that environment where we're connecting with our team and kind of holding what our values were as an organization, as people doing this work, we said, okay, this is what we've got to do. So one thing that I wanted to also address around the language that's used in our key findings as Colleen went through the research is I want to stress that even as we see this, and we were seeing, repeated language of aggression and aggressive, and there was these patterns and no consistency, one thing that we were talking about was reflecting on the fact that this isn't because the team didn't care. This isn't because they were cruel. This wasn't because they were bad. It was nothing negative. I was the theme that I recognize in this is that we were a small team. Colleen and I just really started to dive into this. And the team is scared. They're overwhelmed. There's fear, like we had heard in a recent presentation. So even where we're seeing, leading reasons for service restriction were violence. What I'm hearing is people were experiencing a lot of violence, right? And in our form, in the tools that we were providing, we weren't able to adequately break down and define what is violence, right? So we have so many deep conversations about language, use of language. What does it mean? How do we use it? And that's where we're trying to really be accountable in the tools that we also provide. And a little bit of the wiggle room, acknowledging that people are humans doing this work to support humans, and we're all just bumbling around sometimes. So just acknowledging that, where there's patterns there wasn't patterns when it came to length. We had a leadership team of 2, a program that's funded to support 25 people, 25 beds, but we're seeing up to 75 individuals a night that are sometimes literally on top of each other. Sometimes you have to create those processes. Who's creating those processes off the side of their desk? So everyone's doing the best that they can, and we took it as a challenge rather than a critique, an opportunity to work with our teams, like we had mentioned through the presentation, and address, okay, what language are we using? This person's challenging staff. Okay, how do we say they're challenging staff? 1, that's not a bad thing. 2, are they identifying a need? How do we address that? What is that need? How do we take it and make it actionable as opposed to taking it personally, right? So trying to remove that a little bit. Tried to de-escalate. So I'm what I see in that, and especially when you see try to de-escalate, but it's not documented what the technique is, rather than being you actually need to document better. Okay, how do I provide tools to help you document better? How do I tell you the purpose of why I need to know what your de-escalation methods were, right? So we'll dive into the form that was created, but the purpose of that is we want to see, okay, so you tried to de-escalate, what did you do? Did it work? Let me know. If it worked, that's great, we'll do it again. If it didn't work, how can we do that? How can we be creative in working with that individual and working with you, the frontline team who's the expert, right? So. Yeah.
So next I'm going to talk a little bit about the form that was created through this research. Sorry. So our previous documentation method, just for a little bit of an overview of what we were doing before, only really included the date of the occurrence, a description of what happened, and then the reason for a service restriction. So through this form, I was able to create a new service restriction way of documenting service restrictions that was much more thorough, and also gave staff the opportunity to reflect and also gave us the opportunity to connect with service users. So some of the things that are included on the form are the staff on shift, a description of the incident, the reason for the service restriction, description of what the staff did to de-escalate the situation, a follow-up if it's needed from staff or management, the length of the restriction, and I really want to highlight these last 2 points, the strategies for the future. It's something new that we added, and it is the place where we document a service user's point of view upon their return, and also what staff thinks that they could do differently next time or what they think kind of didn't work. So these next few slides are screenshots of the form. So as you can see, we have a section for the description of what occurred, and then we have the reason for the service restriction. When we were creating this form, we were very intentional with what the language was for the reason for the service restriction. So you see things like physical assault or violence, which gives us more insight into what violence really means in this case. Sexual assault, arson, or significant open flame risk. So persistent predatory behavior, significant intentional property damage. So that would mean like the property damage was intentional, it wasn't accidental. Yielding a weapon for the purpose to threaten or harm others, and persistent theft from other people or property as well. And then we also created a section where staff summarizes how they attempted to redirect or de-escalate the situation, which kind of like has people write down the techniques they used more intentionally when they're documenting. This is the second part of the form. So we can include the start date for the service restriction, and then the staff that's requesting it and the staff that's supporting it, as well as a return date. So frontline staff at Allein's Place are able to lay service restrictions for up to 3 days, and anything beyond that is reviewed by Michele and I. And if they select that management is to follow up with the service restriction, then Michele and I automatically get an email with a description of the incident and the reason for the restriction and the staff that was on shift. So this is a screenshot of the strategies for the future portion. So as you can see, we have a section for the service user's point of view of what happened and what the team thinks that they could do differently in the future. So as you can see, the form encourages accountability amongst staff and service users. And staff is able to look back on approaches that they've used that were effective in the past. They can look back and see what might have not been effective in the past. And kind of go from there. Yeah. I also sometimes end up filling out the service user's point of view part of the forum because I do engage service users in a lot of conversation when they're coming back from restrictions as well.
So where are we now? Figuring it out every day. So even though we've seen a significant increase in people accessing our numbers, we weren't able to fully pull all that data because we're having a few conflicting data issues in our city and in our program right now. But we know 2 years ago when we first started, on a February night, the highest number that we would see, and I had looking through our old stats, was like 21, 22 people, and we were like, oh, this is a busy night. We go up to 75. So mind you, something that I forgot to mention is because we're a drop-in, so we're actually not 24/7. We used to open at 10 p.m. We were able to get additional funding during the winter months where we open up at 6 p.m., go overnight, and then close at 1 p.m. So the easiest way to explain it is we're closed between 1 p.m. and 6. Other than that, we're open. But in that time frame, even with those closures, we can see up to 75, 80 people with 25 beds. So that means like a few things. Many different people moving in and out of the space, in the space at the same time, still the same amount of staffing numbers. So, we're looking at a high volume of people, so that doesn't mean that our crisis and our conflict and all of those things have decreased, but we have seen a decrease in service restriction issuance. So something that I say, I'm like, the goal, I try and step back a little bit. We're not like, hey, we don't want to do them. I try and find the balance with the team where I'm like, where they are required, where there's safety that we need to ensure, where there's like guidelines and things that we have to maintain safety for everybody's comfort in the program. We have to issue them, but where can we be creative? So these are the numbers that we've seen. We have seen a decrease. There is potential limitations, right? Sometimes I'm like, I don't know if the person really wanted to fill out the form, so they might have something should have been issued maybe here, but they didn't do it. But I'm like, there's also worse issues if the person was creative and felt like they could manage the situation. Then like that's a positive in our book. We're trying to reduce barriers and have people in our space, but find that balance. So the number of women who are experiencing homelessness has increased. We have come a long way. We started with a Word doc when the program with the mats and the soup on the ground and have come to this place now. So that's something that we're proud of, and I think that it's really shifted our dynamic and our relationship on our team. And similar to what you had said before, folks that were really not into it and didn't align with what their values were, they needed that black and the white. Maybe there was other spaces that worked for them as far as where they were going. And then we've seen a huge shift in our team of folks that we least expected that have been like, I actually asked her to go for a walk instead of restricting her for 3 days. And she came back and she was fine. I'm like, yeah, like she might have needed that break, right? So it's really, it's been a great opportunity to see the creative solutions that people have been able to come up with. Like I mentioned, the decrease in service restrictions, the engaging meaningful conversations. We've also been intentional with our language, service restriction versus break-in service. We've identified like a break-in service is anything less than 24 hours. We're uniquely positioned in the sense that we close. So sometimes it's 11 o'clock and we just say, today is just not the day. So maybe you're heading out for an extra hour or two, you can come back at 6 p.m. So it's not a full restriction, we're just taking a break for a couple hours. And like that's also an acceptable thing that the team can do, right? It's not a consequence. We're just kind of setting a line that we need to move on and kind of move away from what's happening in this moment. So the relationship between staff and service users has increased. The skill building and reflection on the team has increased. It's really nice because I laugh and like, you're being leadership, you have this great conversation with somebody, you go to the team and you're like, she said that, she really apologized, she was really reflective, and they look at you like, yeah. Like, I'm sure, right? Like, I was there. You didn't see how bad it got. And I'm like, no, like, it was great. But so we spend a lot of time encouraging our teams, like, you have that conversation also. It doesn't have to only be us. If it isn't, like, significant violence and it's something that you can, like, build that relationship, it's okay to be transparent. And, like, we couldn't manage what was happening, but we want to have that direct conversation with you. So we've seen the team really increase and improve in that. So that's something that we're really proud of and hear that feedback from people. So I know we're over time, but yeah. I think that's our presentation there. I wanted to thank everybody for having us and being a part of this this connection here. I'm looking forward to asking you more questions. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Colleen and Michele. I love these presentations today because I think that when we're talking about transformations of our space and trying to become housing focused shelters adopt lower barrier. There's a marriage between those two concepts, right? So I'm glad that these conversations are all happening in the same space in this session today. I really want to maximize the amount of time left at the end for folks to ask really like critical questions that you want to ask that's going to be able to create opportunity for practical applications when you go back to your home communities after the conference. So I'll be really, really brief. This is actually like my sales pitch of CSTN. I'm not selling anything because everything that we do is for free, but it is, CSTN is a group of emergency shelter leaders and organizations across Canada that really see the need to adopt a more housing-focused, lower barrier approach to our work, because for a lot of folks, emergency shelters are their first point of contact when they become homeless, and we can be a huge engine or driver to help end their homelessness as quickly as possible. Right? As Kevin mentioned, there's an opportunity for us to see ourselves as shelter operators as the beginning of a process that will hopefully safely and quickly rehouse someone, as opposed to a destination where they feel stuck for years. So I'm a team of one, but I'm very, very privileged to be connected to a network of really, really smart shelter operators who agree to be members and do true peer-to-peer knowledge exchange and help each other out. Right, we're all at different stages of this journey of transformation. Some of us might feel like we're further along, and others that we learned yesterday are just like, I've never operated a shelter before, and I'm opening the doors tomorrow, and I don't even know if I know how to do lower barrier right or what housing focus means. And so, but we all have things that we can contribute. There's certain pieces that maybe we have a strong grasp on that we can provide knowledge to some of our peers, and they can maybe provide in some areas that we're struggling with. So we really aim for it to be a network of shelter providers across the country that can do that peer-to-peer learning and not feel like they're doing this work in isolation in their community or in their individual shelters. So we do really want to focus on, as a network, is how are we doing a lot of resource development for our members to have quick and easy access to it, and collecting it and posting it on our website so that you can build capacity as you make these changes and go down this journey. And as we saw, it's not a journey that happens overnight. Even with Kevin and his super gung-ho, ambitious staff that wanted to go super fast, we're still at a process of, we're 7 years later and the work still doesn't feel anywhere near done. But we also want to be a network that can have a collective voice to drive policy and act as a collective voice for advocacy at a time when I think that homelessness, now I've worked in this sector for 20 plus years, it's always been hard, it's never been easy, but I don't ever remember it being this hard. So I think there's a crucial opportunity right now where things seem like they're at their darkest to have collective support and collective voice for big impact with policymakers and help inform that policy through strong advocacy. And when I think about transforming shelters, it is operations wide. You can think about the nuts and bolts of what it takes to make that change. But it's also about a mindset, right? It's about a philosophy. It's about a paradigm shift. As Kevin shows through his leadership, he lives and breathes housing focus interventions and how to weave them and permeate it throughout the organization. And we need to do that in order to make that transformation happen. Because I think traditionally or historically, here's the system that we've developed for our emergency shelters that I don't think is fair for anybody who actually operates them, right? For way too long, we put a focus, a limited focus and a limited investment on prevention and diversion, and then a lot of focus and investment on emergency response, and not a whole lot in outflow resources like rapid rehousing solutions. And I think that that is a system that makes it really, really easy for someone to enter your shelter and really, really hard for them to get out. Versus moving to a paradigm that looks at designing a system like this, right? Heavy focus and attention and investment in prevention and diversion in your shelter, in every service that you provide within your shelter, that mindset, right, of like, it's everybody's business housing in this shelter. So lots of training and lots of focus and resources committed to prevention and diversion where it can be done safely and appropriately. And then of course, there's still a need for an emergency response when prevention and diversion has been exhausted. But we need to make sure that when we have folks in our space, what's next, right? That's just the beginning of the rehousing process. It's not the destination, as Kevin mentioned. And why it's really critical to move from the left to the right is because on the left, what it's done is it's left emergency shelters to be the solutions to everybody else's sector's limitations or other systems' limitations, right? Someone loses their housing, go to shelter. Someone's discharged from hospital or jail with no fixed address, go to shelter. Your situation seems too complex, go to shelter. That's a lot of pressure on shelter operators to be a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people. And that's doing your best just to try and manage the chaos, right? We're just managing homelessness here. We're just trying to meet the immediate needs versus over here on the right is about ending homelessness. We're trying to end someone's experience of homelessness one person at a time, driving reductions and monitoring that over time. And people will say things like, this work is really, really hard, and I agree. But burnout doesn't come from changing your approach, as hard as it is to change your approach. Burnout, more often than not, comes from continuing to do really hard work in the same way over and over and over again, and getting the same result that you don't want, and feeling like as if it feels like futile what you're doing. So I'm sure all the speakers up here can attest is to say when you have really tired, burnt out staff, sometimes change rejuvenates them, reinvigorates them, because it gives them hope and potential to actually try to create different results or outcomes with people, a lot of people that they feel like they're stuck with in really hard situations. I'm gonna move through this really quickly, but like humans are scared of change. It's okay, some more than others. But this is typically the process that folks move through when they think about the transformational change process, our thoughts and feelings around it, right? Maybe we start with, we understand that there's a need for change. We don't necessarily know what that is, but that something doesn't feel right. Then there's some confusion. Like, I want to move towards lower barrier and more housing focus, but I don't really know what that means and how that affects my day-to-day or my job description or how I'm supposed to function every day at work. And then it can move into anxiety and loss. Like, I really love that Kevin's been in our shelter for 5 years because he's a really nice guy and he helps me around the shelter. And if he leaves, his space is going to be filled potentially by another person like Grant, who I don't know and might be a nightmare to work with. And now all of a sudden it feels like my job is getting harder because I just successfully housed a really nice guy. And the loss can also feel something like, this is not the type of work that I originally signed up for, and I feel like I'm going to miss doing that work when we move towards a lower barrier housing focused approach. But hopefully over time, and through strong leadership, coaching and training and opportunities like that, that we get a greater sense of clarity around what the work entails and how to do it. We have a new vision of where we want to go and what we want to achieve going forward. And then we start to integrate those things, and then it just becomes part of our new normal that we also just keep working to improve and add to restructuring over time. So I polled some CSTN existing members to say, where did they feel like they were at in that transformational process, that transformational change process, right? And the results I got back, kind of a mixed bag, but very polarizing. There's a lot of people who feel like they're already doing it and they've done some restructuring and they're well on their way. But then there's also a very large group who are just at the beginning. And so then me, as someone trying to coordinate and support shelters across Canada, saying, holy smokes, we have really experienced folks and really new folks. I can't just present the same material to them, because for some of them it's going to be too advanced, and so for some of them it's going to be like, yeah, we already know that. That's like 101 stuff. But it also shows me too that there's a lot of collective knowledge within this existing group to be able to coach their peers through this process, as we saw from the folks up front here today. The other thing that I asked them is like, how many webinars have you gone to? And like, because I also want to get a sense of like how familiar are people with some of the concepts that we're teaching in our monthly webinars. Because these are the ways that CSTN can help you as shelter operators if you decide to be a member, which is free, which is completely open, which is available for frontline staff, managers, directors, board members, funders, anybody and everybody who has a business in shelter work. We have our monthly webinars. There's different topics every month, but they're all related to helping you move through that process of operationalizing these changes in your shelter. We have on the website a self-assessment tool that will help you be able to do your own assessment internally with your staff to say, how housing focused are we already in these different areas? And then it'll give you some recommendations around where you can focus your energy and your attention if you want to gradually start integrating more housing-focused approaches. And then you can monitor your progress by doing periodically doing the assessment over again. And what I think is really, really crucial, and I heard from members in an Ask Me Anything session yesterday, was like a lot of folks think that they have to start and create a lot of things from scratch. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's got to feel so overwhelming if you think that you have to do everything new for the first time. We have so many tools and resources that we host on our website around all these different areas of making that change, that from very generous partners who just say, yes, take what we have, host it on the site. Hopefully it can help others, and you can adopt it, you can adapt it, but don't feel like as if you have to create something new every time. So this is the other thing. If you're a shelter and you think that you're really rocking at something, and you have a really great tool for something, or you get really good outcomes with something, share it with me if you're open to it, and we can host it on the site, because I'm sure people want to learn from you if it's getting cool results. So go to transformshelter.ca. The site looks like this. Whole bunch of resources in the resource tabs. Whole bunch of webinars that are recorded, that are archived from previous sessions that we've done. It also promotes upcoming webinars. This is a little bit of what the resource page looks like. And I really, really want to highlight a couple tools that help people. There's the guidelines and then there's the manual. That really gives practical direction around what does prevention or diversion look like in your shelter. How do you design positions? What are service orientation considerations that you need to look at? Everything that you can imagine. What is safe and supportive and trauma-informed intake and orientation to your space, things like that. This is what the webinar page looks like. So you'll be able to see, like our most recent one was self-directed and staff-involved rapid resolution. A little plug for our next one. I know it's everybody's favorite topic, is by name data, coordinated access, and how to help shelter guests get quote-unquote document ready. I know that that's like really boring work, but I always tell like advocates to say like the boring administrative stuff is actually some of like the most important work when it comes to like either like getting someone housed or like keeping someone housed, right? How many times do we know people who stay stuck in shelter on the streets because of the like administrative tasks that like we just don't get done, including like clients who avoid them because they're really horrible sometimes. So we're going to talk about that in November. Ultimately, the goal of the webinar series is about strengthening your shelter services so that it leads to improved outcomes and ideally improved housing outcomes. The other is that hopefully you as shelter operators feel like you can start to align and feel like you fit within your broader system of care related to homelessness and housing in your community. And so that you don't feel like you're alone, but you're actually connected to the other kind of pieces that fit within your system of care. We do want to see this as a driver of creating a movement, right? This is a movement of very radical change that we want to see in our shelters because it's needed. And the other is, I don't know, like maybe we want to establish like really clear and consistent service expectations for our shelter guests. Remove the guessing work, right? If you've ever been in an emergency shelter or worked at different ones, you know that the expectations can change from not just community to community, but from shelter to shelter within that same community. And so it feels like you never really know what level of service or type of service or what's expected of you depending on which shelter you go to. So let's try and harmonize some of those practices so that we can develop some consistency and remove the guesswork and potentially unintentionally re-traumatizing people through that confusion with this ambiguity around shelter expectations. If you want to be a CSTN member, come visit me, scan a QR code. It brings you to a link that just says what's your name, your position, organization, and like, do you want to get information from us periodically? Like it's really low to no commitment if you don't, or you can be super active. Like Kevin, I lean on him all the time for stuff, and Sandra, and some other folks to contribute to our learning sessions together and things like that. The other is that we're also partnering with the University of Calgary, the DI, and Org Code around trying to understand where shelters across Canada are at in their journey of being lower barrier and more housing focused. What changes have they already made? What resources do they already have? But what resources don't they have, and what are their struggles, and what do they need to be in place in order to continue to make further change? So this survey is really, really important that we get a lot of people answering it across the country so that we know the true needs and the depth of those needs or the progress that you've already made. And what's really great is it's anonymous, so be as honest as you want to be. There's also Courtney right over there in the glasses. You want to raise a hand? If you see her around, say like, hey, can I scan your QR code? And she'll gladly show it to you, and you can scan it and do it whenever you have the chance. That's it. So that's it for presentations. I went over my time, my apologies, but we do still have 11 minutes before we are asked to leave the room. Are there any questions for our presenters from anybody in the audience? Yes. Oh, would you like to there's a microphone there in the aisle available if you'd like.
The last thing that a female identified trans person needs is to have their male voice amplified. I usually tell people it's not contagious, and if it is, come see me afterwards. So I never had luck in Calgary. I spent too many nights at the hostel there in my past life. One of the most expensive cities to live in. How do you make that paradigm shift for people from shelter to independent living, no supplements and market rent in one of the most expensive cities in Calgary? Sorry, I hope that is what you were trying to say, or the message that you want us to bring home.
That is it exactly. We are able to do it. So over the years, we've developed a very tight-knit network of landlords that work with us. And honestly, we had to start to shift our mindsets around housing as well. I know when I worked in a Housing First program and ran one, my mindset was very much that everyone needed a one-bedroom apartment. But we're also, when I first moved into housing on my own, I didn't probably have the place that I was looking for a Housing First program. And having the conversations with people and that engagement piece, and if we have to look at things like shared accommodations or roommate agreements or that type of thing, is having the conversation about the fact that this is a stepping stone into the next level of your journey, just like you were when you're 18 or 19. So that's the main way. And honestly, on the other side of it, the individuals that we are fortunate enough to work with are 1,000 times better at budgeting and all that type of stuff than I ever have been. So relying on their expertise, once we move them from shelter to housing, really following that Housing First model, they're working through those different stages. But I think the biggest part is, as service providers, is shifting our own mindsets on what housing is and engaging with individuals about what housing is for them on that first stage of exiting shelter.
I'm gonna add something to that too. I have to say, in a previous role, as someone who was overseeing coordinated access for a community, it was a big humility pill to swallow to see monthly reports from our by name list of showing every month consistently of the new people who got housed that month. Most folks did it outside of coordinated access, did it without being assigned to a program, like a support program or a housing program, and without a subsidy. So then I was thinking, I'm like, we're hiring the wrong people because most folks are finding their own housing on their own. How the heck are they doing that despite all the barriers and challenges that they're facing? And so then I said, it would be naive of me to not do something with that insight and start to speak directly and interview directly people who found their housing on their own, that were doing it better than paid trained staff or better than the coordinated access system that I was trying to prove is really good. And so it was about having some key interviews with people that got housed despite all those challenges, including affordability. And there was a couple trends that came up. One was finding housing similar to finding employment. There's formal resources in place, but a lot of us find jobs and housing through relationships. And the other was, a lot of folks said, I had to rethink in this market exactly that. What does housing look like for now? And isn't necessarily going to be forever, but perhaps it is about a rooming house or something smaller than what I originally thought of, but it's a more suitable alternative than the streets or shelter. And while I continue to work around what's my next goal for maybe a next housing experience that feels more aligned with what I hope for myself.
Yeah, you got me on housing. So one, like a really good example of that type of work was, we'll sit down with an individual and really work on different things between needs and wants. And I remember one individual coming in with like 4 pieces of paper of his wants. If we were going to house him, this was the list. It took almost 3 hours of whiteboarding, but we got that down to the fact that actually what he wanted was a full-size stove because he used to be a chef. So by that engagement piece and then putting the time in at the front, we're able to actually find those different places.
Other questions from anyone? Yeah.
See the first gentleman? Sorry for that.
Kevin.
We're just a little curious on when you approached your team on this new shelter to housing concept. When you first introduced it, you said there was a high drop in staff. What was like are you talking like half the staff and how did you recover from that basically?
Okay. So the question was in the very beginning, what was our turnover? And how we managed that. The turnover didn't actually happen right away. And the turnover was actually a lot less than we thought. So it's really on the leadership to follow those change management principles that is going to support with the individuals that are not thinking about or a little uneasy. I don't have data on with me on what the actual numbers were, but it wasn't to a point that it affected our operations by any means. Yeah.
Yes. At the. Oh.
I can hear you.
Yep.
The 4.8% return on an awesome stuff. Do you incorporate any kind of budget facilitating budget boxes to help with the basis of housing? And make back and forth to the choice of being part of that or the share of that?
So the question was with our 4.8 return to shelter rate, I need to just a clarify point there. That is only individuals that return to the Calgary drop-in center. I unfortunately don't know if they've gone to another shelter in town. The quick answer is no. We are fortunate we have a rent bank where we're able to remove that first month's rent and last month's rent or damage deposit. Individuals can access case management for up to 3 months if they require it or if they want it, and we'll work on their individual basis of what they're looking for. We strictly follow the housing first principles and as well as case management principles, where if an individual wants to work on, say, budgeting, we are connecting them with an organization that does budgeting. But it is all client driven. And honestly, like most of us here work in shelters, if I have to tie my shoes really tight at night, or sleep on my shoes, I'm not going to be able to know how to think about any of that stuff. But I know tonight when I go back to my hotel room and slip my shoes off and I'm feeling like that release, I can actually start to work on those things. And that's what we're seeing, is that putting housing first in principle, like using it that way, the people are actually going out and finding the resources on their own.
Yeah, so like all those skills, opportunities, I think we talk about like the greatest place to practice those is in your housing, in the most natural setting where it makes sense, right? As opposed to trying to practice those things when you're surviving in shelter. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
With the YWCA, your program, is it in the same building as you do your other programs, or is that a separate building that's on?
It is smack dab and along the side/front of a multi-service organization. So we have a senior center, we have a child care facility, we have a literacy council, we have a sexual assault center, we have an employment wing. We have quite a few things happening in the building.
So is it a YWCA building?
Yep.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
So your YWCA still exists in that building, like the normal, like I'm thinking of YW in Melbourne. Does it do the same thing as the YWCA?
In like which sense?
Like swimming pool, exercise and all that stuff?
So we've made a bit of a shift in as far as how we're supporting the community, because it's something that was really important to address the immediate needs of our local community. So like we mentioned, shelter, beds, and spaces were limited compared to the amount of folks that were unhoused. So we had to make a tough decision to actually fill our pool, and that's what our program is built on top of. Yeah. Yeah, so we've, even on that note, still focusing on health and gender equity and those pieces, but kind of taking a different angle, and still partnering with local organizations that do have pools and have different fitness abilities, and finding virtual ways to do that, but just not with an actual physical pool.
How we do it for time? We're right at 3 o'clock. But stick around. We're not going anywhere. CSTN also has a booth if you want to swing by and chat more. Thanks, everybody up front here. Thank you.